Luis will take it then from here. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent. Very good. So again, welcome everybody to today's webinar about the Operations Room 3.0. I tried to make a very brief introduction since we had a late start. Just some words about Metaforum for the ones who are here for the first time. What are we doing? We undertake and promote original research regarding Stafford Beer's legacy, managerial cybernetics, mainly viable system model, syntegration, and now with a specific focus on cybersyn, or the so-called operations room concept. Secondly, we ensure VSM quality in education and practice, and we form a global community of knowledge and practice. The blue boxes show you what we are doing, and currently we are here in the VSM Practitioner webinars. We have Luis Harel here tonight. We already had two webinars this year, one with Jan Wehinger and Jan with Felix Scheep, both consultants working in the automotive industry. In September, we will have an application case, also German industry, by Judith Hennemann. And in October, an application case in the financial services industry by Andreas Schmidt. And in November, one for Mark Lamberts. It's always the second Wednesday, actually, I think, second Wednesday per month. Now, regarding today's topic, environment for decision. Just a very brief introduction. The roots of the operations room concept comes from the Second World War, the so-called war rooms, where the armies realized that they have to take interdisciplinary decisions. And they're setting up rooms that allow for a common view on the environment, what is going on, real-time information, and take interdisciplinary decisions, simulate decisions, and so on. That concept in general was used by Stafford himself in the early 70s in Chile. That was a rebuild of his operation room with basically quite the same idea in mind. And we have built an operations room about 20 years ago with still basic IT feasibilities, appliances, with a difficult IT basis, so to speak, but with the same elements still of an operations room, with information and alarm, with a memory, a model of itself, a model of the environment, of totality, and so on. And we have currently discussed in Metaforum where today's technology would be able to lead us, and we came up with that kind of picture. That's a picture by Steve Bruce. That could be the future of so-called operations rooms, war rooms, situation rooms, however you would like to call them. Now, since we're working on these concepts, I would like to introduce you to Luis Harel. He will say something about himself in a minute. We are currently looking for a pilot project in the German industries to establish and build a modern kind of operation room, also supported by AI. And Luis will tell us a little bit now where we are today and what the current situation of the concept is. Luis, are you here?
I am, yes. Hi, everyone.
Excellent. Excellent. So please, Luis, very happy to have you here as my guest in the webinar, and please take it away.
Perfect. Thanks very much for the introduction. I think you need to stop sharing so I can share my screen.
Yes.
But once that's done, yep, perfect. Should be coming up now. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. So good evening, everyone, and thank you, Martin, for the introduction, obviously for Metaforum for hosting. Apologies for the few minutes of delay, but I'm happy to go a little bit over the hour if needed. Martin introduced me. I'm a senior associate at PIMS.ai Malik, where I've been for over 3 years now, working predominantly in the predictive analytics practice, so delivering data-driven strategy projects and evidence-based recommendations. By background, I am an economist by education. I did a master's in management in LSE, but I want to focus a little bit more about and spend a minute about what the firm does, because the name carries, let's say, two sides that are important. So on the one side, we've got the management science and cybernetics tradition of St. Gallen. We're building on Redmond Malik, Stafford Beer, Alois Geilweiler. That's our organizational transformation pillar at PIMS.ai Malik. We support executives on transformation, development through Malik management systems, integrations, leadership programs, and so on. And on the other side, which is the side where I specialize mostly, is the predictive analytics side. So evidence-based insights to inform decision. And at its heart is strategic benchmarking, which is built on the PIMS program. And this, I'll come back to this PIMS program because it's key to this whole operations room. From this benchmark, before I get into it, there have been two offshoots, one being customer value management, understanding the value for money that you offer relative to your competitors. And this is used to sharpen your product and pricing decisions. But we also have our operational excellence arm, which is industry-specific benchmarking, best known for the lubricants and greases supply chain program, which covers 50% of global lubricants and greases production. And we compare manufacturing plants worldwide to cut operating costs without losing performance. But since PIMS and strategic benchmarking is the anchor of everything I'll show you tonight, I think it deserves proper introduction. So I'll spend a little bit of time on this. The PIMS program was launched in the late 60s at General Electric, off the back of a very costly strategic mistake. They invested billions into the IT sector without gaining any real competitive advantage. And rather than writing that off as bad luck, they decided to turn their portfolio of dozens of business units, from light bulbs to X-rays to nuclear power, turn all of that portfolio into a research database. The goal being to find out empirically what separates a winning business from a losing one. And the findings were clear, and it has held ever since. Investment alone doesn't drive performance. A strong competitive position in an attractive market does. The program since then expanded into a multi-company data set. It was run by Harvard Business School, American Strategic Planning Institute, and so on. And it has kept growing since then. It's been one of the longest running cross-industry research programs on business strategy and performance in existence. Today, the database holds over 12,000 observations of business units. So each observation tracks a business unit over 3 years and across about 500 variables, be it market structure, competitive position, customer value, cost and capital structure, operations, financials. It's a very complete data set. And so combined, that is some 25,000 business years of data. And all of it was contributed by the companies themselves. So internal management data, not public filings, and that makes it non-replicable. Just as important as the size, I mentioned it earlier, the findings are stable. So the relationships between strategic factors and bottom line performance have proven to be consistent across industries, geographies, and eras. This is what makes the evidence usable here. We have been able to build predictive advisory models on top of the database, which I'll mention later on. But one thing that I really want to highlight is that the unit of observation in the database is a business unit. It's not the organization or the corporation. We look at the business unit because that is where strategy is written and executed, where you can identify a market, a customer set, a competitor. So if you're looking at Unilever, we don't talk about Unilever as a corporation. We talk about the ice cream unit of Unilever. That's the home level that we've designed our operations room for. Getting to the operations room itself, I know Martin touched on it. I'm going to give you a basic conceptual introduction, just to set the scene, and I'll keep the theory light, as I know many of you will know this very well. But an operations room is an environment for decision and control, a space where decision makers can be together and share a real-time, structured, holistic view of the system that they are steering. In this environment, we can filter out the noise in favor of surfacing critical signals, things that are important, and options and paths forward can be evaluated together as a group against the same picture of reality. As Martin mentioned, there's been applications in the British War Room in World War II. NASA mission control can be taken along that front. And of course, Stafford Beer's original operations room in Chile applied to an economy was mine here. I selected 3 core reasons why the operations room matters. The first being there's an abundance of data, and data does not always equal information. Real-time data has been accessible for a very long time now, but it's created a pathology being overabundance of the irrelevant, then aggregation from there, averaging, and that destroys exactly the variety carrying signals. In the unaccountability machine, Dan Davies describes where this ends. Decisions get delegated into rule books, reports, until no one can actually locate the source of a mistake. The second point is delay. Most organizations tend to steer their businesses based on financial results, but those tend to be the last place where a problem appears. If you have an eroding market position or a failing innovation pipeline, by the time that reaches your P&L, scores can be months or years old. So to Beer's point in the brain of the firm, nothing in the P&L exposes the manager who is quietly destroying the company's standing in its market. So managing purely based on financials can be similar to driving using the rearview mirror. The final point is interconnection or interconnectivity between the variables, because the variables that matter don't move independently. If we think about it, market position affects your pricing power, which affects your margin, which then affects what can be invested into innovation and your people, and that circles back to market position. So if you're monitoring in silos, what would be a causal chain looks like 6 separate mysteries. So complexity compounds with every interaction. So the structural answer for this is an environment for decision, being shared, current, connected. And the question is how to build one that is more than just an expensive dashboard. And that's what I'm going to get to in the rest of this talk. And the way I'm going to do this is I'll take you through the process that we went through to build what is our version of the operations room. And there's a couple things, before I get to that slide, actually, there's a couple of things I want to mention to set expectations. This is more of a quantitative take on the operations room, because that is what we at PIMS are best at, based on the PIMS quantitative research program. There are a lot of qualitative components, and there are other people currently in the school who are working on those points as well, and I'll mention them. But what you're going to see today is primarily on the quantitative side. And I'll reiterate also that the home of our operations room is at the business unit level. We think the natural home for this is the S3, S4, System 3, System 4 domain of a business unit, the inside and now meeting the outside and then. It can work along recursion levels, for example, up towards a portfolio of business units, down into a business unit, but the home level remains the business unit. Let's get into the first steps. And what we started with was to try and define what we mean by performance. Most organizations track business performance in terms of profitability, with the implicit rule, the more the better. But the 2 halves of that statement can be wrong. A business can post outstanding short-term profits while destroying the basis of its future. They can cut innovation, squeeze quality, starve talent, and Beer labeled this the irresponsible optimizer. is alternative to break performance into triple index. So we've got actuality, what is happening right now in reality, what is the current state of the system, capability, what could we achieve with the existing resources and competencies. So if we acted differently within the current same constraints, what could we achieve? And potentiality is what could our system or business evolve into, allowing for changes in constraints and resources. And those are system agnostic. Beer applied them to steel plants and then applied them to the national economy. We then apply it to a business unit. What this triple index buys you is a separation of reality from realistic targets. Actuality, we look at it on its own, can be hard to understand or scale without a reference point. What is information is the gap to the reference point here. So if we take profitability, for example, if my actuality is lower than my capability, I am underperforming against my own strengths. So there's money left on the table. However, we also say that actuality can be above capability. Now, if you take purely a piece of equipment that you're running to capacity, that's not possible. But in the case of a business, we can go into the irresponsible optimizers territory and say that we can optimize profit, maximize profit unsustainably. Without a change in resources or constraints, a system will trend back towards its capability. It isn't sustainable and it shouldn't last. So the gap to the reference point. And if we take it beyond to potentiality, the gap between capability, potentiality is the strategic conversation, right? What could this big business become if we take the right actions or if we take X or Y action? Now, that raises an obvious question, capability and potentiality of what and computed how? Profitability is one variable. If we measured the triple index on profitability alone, we'd have rebuilt a system problem that we started with, a lagging indicator. So what we actually want to measure in VSM fashion is across an entire system. And we think about it as viability. And I'll touch a bit more on this in a second. But we looked at 3 frameworks and saw a bit of an overlap. If you dive deeper into each, of course, there's some nuances. But what I'm trying to get here is at a high level, all 3 frameworks hint towards splits between operational actuality, strategic capability, and future potentiality above it. On the right, we have Malik's double S-curve, where we have the old red system slowing or declining as the new green system emerges and the critical zone where resources must be reallocated between them, such that we can evolve into the purple potentiality or future state. In the middle, we have a section of Galweiler's strategic navigation system. Control variables ordered by time horizon. Most immediate are liquidity, profit, neutrality, then today's success potentials, and then future success potential. The color coding remains the same, actuality, capability, potentiality. And then finally, we have Beer's viable system, where system 3 focuses on the inside and now, then system 4 and 5 go into the outside and then moving into strategy and normative policies. I will accept here that the purple mapping potentiality being a system 5 can be contentious. You might say that all 3 indices actually fit better squeeze between S3 and S4, and I'm inclined to agree.
Yeah.
But what I will instead say is that system 3 fits well with actuality, then capability seems to fall between system 3 and system 4 because you're working with your actuality to plan for your strategy. And then the potentiality, I would argue, sits somewhere between S4 and S5 because S5 matters in terms of direction and policies, and S4, of course, addresses it as well. In principle, This remains, however, and we settle on this for illustrative mapping. So I accept that the mapping is contentious, but you get the general idea of S3 to S5 being actuality towards potentiality. Now, the objective that we are looking for, so not performance, we're looking for viability. And the viability of an organism is the ability for them to adapt, to survive, to thrive in a complex environment. We want to take this towards a business rather than an organism, but similar to the viable system. So how do you track viability? And Ashby gives us the principle here. We watch the essential variables. Those are the variables that must stay within physiological limits for a system to survive. In a human, that can be body temperature, blood pressure, and so on. For a business, Malik's answer is the 6 central performance controls. We have market position, innovation performance, productivities, attractiveness to the right people, liquidity and cash flow, and finally, stability. And there's 3 important characteristics to these CPCs. First being that they are leading indicators, they're not lagging. The deterioration of a market position or innovation will surface years before it reaches the P&L. So this is how you buy back the delay that I mentioned before. Second is they're interdependent. So if you're breaching in one, that will propagate into the others. Not a weakness, it's what makes intelligence alerts possible. We'll talk about this later. And finally, they have physiological ranges. So the goal is not necessarily to maximize all CPCs, but in the case of, for example, innovation, innovation is good, but only to a certain extent because innovation is costly and therefore it will impact the other CPCs. So it's rather avoiding them falling out of their acceptable ranges and to keep them in balance. You'll note that profitability is still there. We haven't abolished it. It's still important. We've just demoted it to being a essential variable rather than the be all end all of the system. Now, you will ask, how do I measure each of these CPCs? Because they seem more like categories. How do you measure market position? So which concrete metrics express within each CPC? And this is where the PIMS database does some real work, because the research that we've done in the PIMS database have identified what factors have direct measurable impact on long-term business success. So we selected those and we've organized them along the CPCs, which you'll see on the screen now. I'm not going to share all of them because a lot of this is RIP, but I'll take the market position as an example. What we say falls under market position is relative market share, not just the absolute market share of a business. We also care about the competitor's market share. Customer value, and we define this precisely as the quality of your offering relative to your competitors and as a function of the relative price, so the price of your product versus competitors. Essentially, your value for money versus your competitors' value for money. And then finally, market growth. Are you in a healthy market? If we were to look at innovation performance, that would be innovation rate, R&D intensity, time to market, and so on across productivities, people, cash flow, etc. Now, the reason we put some in bold and some not in bold is we're saying the bold ones are the evidence-based minimum an organization needs to keep under control, and the rest is recommended or customizable to the client. So it's not a fewer metrics because the dashboard becomes too cluttered, excuse me. It's these metrics because 60 years of data say that survival depends on them. So for a particular business, a non-negotiable might not be relevant for another business. So that customization we allow for each of the CPCs on top of the minimum that we suggest. And all of these are wired together. Innovation rate might be rising, which looks like a strength, but PIMS will let you know, or let you ask whether a heavy R&D spend to lead to that innovation rate isn't the acceptable range or past it. The PIMS hasn't just identified the variables here. We've also studied the relationships between them across thousands of businesses. So that's going to come back as a topic first for alerts, but then also in a simulation engine at the end. But now that we have all these metrics and we know what to track, what it allows us to do is to establish the actuality. We track the actuality of a business, not as a P&L snapshot, but across the CPCs in terms of viability. And these can be tracked month on month, quarter to quarter, doesn't matter, but three disciplines apply. We can separate noise from signal. So if it's a transient wobble, we can filter those out. If it's a step change or a sustained drift, those can be flagged as genuine changes. Our situation has changed. It should be flagged. You should make a note of this. We can also, using the PIMS database, give you a corridor of fluctuation. So for each KPI, we can give you an acceptable range based on the database. If you can think about it as the species-specific physiological limits, but just applied to business. If you're inside the corridor, that's fine. You can keep fluctuating there. But if you breach it, an alert will shine, and you'll know that something has gone wrong. So we can turn this monitoring into regulation. The final point that I want to make is we can use interconnectivity. So because the CPCs propagate to each other, any CPC falling out of line is itself an alert that the others will follow. So I mentioned that reduces the delay that we had in a P&L. So financial measures versus reality. We can then reduce that delay and we'll know what to address, and we can expect what is going to fall next, so we can address things faster. That's the reality part of the equation, the actuality. But I mentioned what is the point of reference, and I want to get to this now. The step that, to my knowledge and our knowledge, no one else can take is that if we collect some extra business information, just some profile information, like what kind of business are you, how much manufacturing do you actually do, we can actually position your business in the PIMS database. And once we've done that, we can use an algorithm to match your business with what we call strategic peers. Those are businesses in our database that have the same strategic position, same structural features. We tend to call those lookalike businesses. Once we have that set of businesses, we can ask two questions. The first one is, how did those businesses in our position perform? And that distribution gives us the capability. And then the second question, because we track businesses over 3 years, we can say, well, how much did those businesses improve over time? So we follow across their 3-year trajectory from our position, how far did they get, and through which actions? And that anchors the potentiality figure. Beer's version Beer's operationalization of capability and potentiality in Chile came from inside the system. And there's value in that. The people closest to the work know it best. And there's a legitimacy that no imposed number can earn. But there are two limits to this, because if the numbers come from inside the system, they're bounded to the system's own experience. You can't propose something that's outside of the things you've seen. And second, they're negotiable. A self-assessment will most of the time lead to an understatement of capacity. So now that we have an outside external piece of evidence, those can't be negotiated up or down. The ceiling comes from what was actually occurred outside and not from within. I will say that those two things are not necessarily rivals. Local knowledge can still choose the variables. It can still interpret the signals. The external evidence answers one thing that the system can't answer about itself, is what is possible from here. I'm sure if Beer had access to such a database in the past, external evidence would form part of the system. So we have our two anchors. where businesses like us should and where we can realistically reach if we do the right things. And that brings me to, sorry, just to highlight on this chart here, we've got the red line, actuality, capability, potentiality. It's just a visualization. And that brings us to the formalization or the full picture of the operations room. And I'll walk the room a little bit. In the center screen, this is everything we've been building so far. 6 CPCs with the triple index overlaid onto it, actuality, capability, potentiality per CPC, with a drill down available into each of those CPCs. So if I look at market position, I can drill down into those KPIs within it, and I can look at the value, the trend, the corridor, the time series, etc. So this screen is the inside and now, the S3 view, the shared situational picture, with the alerts wired in, etc. And you will notice there's a navigation option at the top. This looks at recursion levels. So I mentioned our recursion level 0 is the business unit. We could go one step above and look at the portfolio of business units, in this case, aggregating and averaging, or we could go one level below into the operating units. That might be regions, might be teams. If we move to the left, we move to the strategic screen, the taking a step towards outside and then the S4 view. So this is where we've plugged in our advisory models, because we have a visualization in the middle screen of our current state, and now we need to plan for the future. What we show on that screen is an evaluation of the business's strategic position. And here we leverage the entire database to assess this business versus everyone else and to say, well, your market is less stealthy than average, as an example. And this can be used to highlight the strengths and the weaknesses of your business to help you build your strategy. An additional step is we can also showcase recommendations based on the lookalike or strategic peers that we've selected before. So out of the set of businesses that are similar to mine, I can look at what they did and those that succeeded and those that failed. And then I can build recommendations based off of that. Winning businesses did X, losing businesses did Y. You should do X and not Y. In short, what this screen formulates is a path forward, what helps you to devise a path forward, a sequence of moves that reaches towards your potentiality. This is what gives the S4 the evidence base of equal standing to the S3 actuals, which in most organizations we haven't had. If I move to the right of the screen, this is what I would like to call the granular screen. And it's deliberately almost entirely custom to the client. It could be a sales dashboard, could be a project completion tracker, could be a key accounts overview, an organization chart, or a smart screen that services the right information at the right moment. I say this knowing what I'll mention afterwards, but this could be done as well. So for example, if innovation rate is an alert, it could surface the decisions or the projects that drove this to become the way it is. Underneath all of this, we've got a form of an organization's model of itself. So the system can hold the current and the past versions of the business, and it can allow the users to map simulations of the business. So we at PIMS have studied the causal relationships between the factors across the database. So all the KPIs that we've mentioned, we've studied the causal relationships between them, and we call that model systemic control loops. And that's the engine that we're going to use behind the what if. So if you move this lever, how would it impact your competitive intensity, your relative price, innovation? And we can watch the propagation through the CPCs before you actually make the decision for your organization. So decisions can be tested and rehearsed in the model first. And we envision this whole environment to be AI enabled, of course. We want an interactive system on the desk. You can ask questions, surface the relevant numbers, the relevant history, evidence, settle debates, and so on. And for both of these points, being the granular screen and this whole AI system and surfacing information, I want to mention Max Licciardi's work, who's I think on the call today, which is directly relevant here and probably honestly deserves its own webinar. But the one paragraph version of it, if I can do it justice, is what I've shown so far tends to be the quantitative side of things. A whole massive component is the collective tacit knowledge underneath the numbers, the causal mechanisms that people carry in their heads about why this business has these values and not others.
Yeah.
Max's tool extracts that knowledge and allows you to map it to the right things, make the right connections between items, and use the VSM structure to do so. Also, even map it onto the quantitative variables. So in this case, the environment could even surface not just the numbers, but the organization's understood mechanism behind the number. His work is really complementary to ours, so we focus on slightly different aspects, but I expect future iterations to really take a step forward for the operations room concept as a whole. Before I close, I know we're getting towards the end of the call. I want to acknowledge maybe some scope boundaries. The one thing that I haven't touched on is how do we monitor external environment? It's not something that I've addressed here. So geopolitics, supply chain risk, things like that, which belong to the environment, the S4's wider environment scanning. That's not something that we've addressed yet, but it's in the plan. The second thing is this doesn't reorganize your business along the VSM. The model is our design lens. The client can keep their structure. We would recommend, of course, they follow the VSM, but it's not a prerequisite, let's say. And the final point is, of course, this is a business application built for commercial purposes. It's not a universal operations room. If you are a non-business use case, I don't expect this to transfer one-to-one in terms of the variables, etc. But I expect the pattern to map very well. So if you think about what matters for your system's viability, which variables are essential, what are their ranges, all of this can map and is system agnostic. So the process is system agnostic. This particular mapping, not necessarily. So to close on this whole concept, I know I've been speaking at you for quite a while. I want to have some questions and some discussion with Martin, perhaps. Complex systems fail because of delayed, aggregated, siloed information, reaching decision makers with no shared model of the system. So we have this architecture from Beer, the essential variables, the triple index, the operations room as the homeostats instrument. We can use reference values here to I struggle to find a way. We can use our models to find the reference values that would only come from within in Beer's models. So now we've added an external anchor and a repeatable format for any business unit. So there's architecture, plug and play for any business unit with the evidence that applies. So perhaps Martin, now I know I'm sure you've wanted to interrupt a couple times, but
I didn't actually. I was just listening. You did a great job. Thank you so much so far, Luis. I would like to open it for discussion now for the participants. And Pascal Misery has posted a first question. Question is in the chat. What value does PIMS offer to a business that is at the cutting edge of its category or is redefining that category? Think of a game changer such as Amazon or SpaceX and so on.
Okay, it's a good question because if you think about a database and working with averages and fluctuation and deviations and things like this, by definition, you're going to look at an average across a whole lot and it's going to reduce the extremes. And if you're at the extreme, perhaps that's not so relevant. We completely accept this. However, the way we select strategic peers is based on your data across these metrics. So we're going to select businesses similar to you. If we have businesses at the cutting edge in a similar position, you're going to be comparable to them regardless. There's still value involved here. Now, if you tell me you're a Anthropic, I'm not even sure I can explain how comparable that would be because it's brand new. But we have some edge cases from the past in the PIMS database that I'm sure we can try and relate to. I think it's on a case by case basis. If you're a really special case, of course, you're not going to be comparable to anyone. But we found that most special cases are perhaps not so special in the end.
Maybe I can just add, this is Pedram speaking. Louis, thank you very much. Fully agreed with what you say, Louis. And on top of that, basically, it's the question about transformational as opposed to incremental capturing of business development. And we have as much transformation in the database as much those businesses from which we have data underwent transformation. Louis started out mentioning the example of General Electric. And General Electric started out with 3 or 4 dozen number of business units, of which only the half continued to do what they used to do originally. So this transformation is captured, but it's not a special database which focuses on those companies that came from a caterpillar, become a butterfly, and go under complete transformational changes. We have as much transformation captured as much of those businesses of which we have data went through transformation.
Thank you so far. While I would like to open it up for everybody, just speak up if you have any comments or questions, you would like to make a statement, whatever.
I would have a question, Martin.
Olaf, good evening. Yes,
hello.
please.
Good evening. Hello, Alois. I'm Olaf calling from Germany. So, and I put my question in the meantime in the chat. If you look at strategic management and see the potentiality or want to capture the potentiality, how do you access the future? Because the strategic options are somehow in the future. They can become opportunities or even threats. Do you use any specific methodology to capture futures in a specific way?
So the way we look at potentiality is across the same metrics that we track that I've shown on the screen. So when we are looking at potentiality, we look at this lookalike businesses that we've identified, and we look at what they've done in the past. So did they reduce this cost, or did they invest more in R&D, etc.? So the recommendations come at a sort of a higher level. So if we tell you your innovation rate is not high enough, we're not going to tell you what you should be innovating in. Because if we are a plug and play for any business across industries, we can't advise necessarily on you need to change your soap to the color red. So we can advise as to what has worked. So we can say if your innovation rate is not high enough, you should invest in that. And can you afford to invest in that? But we're not going to hold your hand all the way to what you need to innovate in. So I think there's a separate exercise that needs to be done in terms of what are the opportunities in our market, and I think that can be implemented on those deeper levels that I've mentioned, the more qualitative information. But in terms of quantitative numbers, we can't go down to that specific level. Did I understand the question correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for answering it specifically. Thanks.
If I may comment on that, if you look at the lower right in the picture, I think what we have here is a model of the environment. based on premises about the future, premises about the development of technologies, regulations, demography, and so on and so on. And I assume that AI will help a great deal in filtering out relevant developments and relevant opportunities and threats that must be addressed when a discussion about strategic changes is necessary. But maybe we have others commenting on that also. Please just speak up. Two participants have their hands up. I just can't see who, so please just speak up.
Okay, it's me, Martin. Luis, this is an extraordinary presentation. I'm deeply impressed with the work that you've done. It's a huge leap forward, and I congratulate you on that. I've got two questions. The first one is, I've always seen the operations room as well, as it's referred to as an environment for decision, and a group of people sitting around with access to all this information, and they've got a problem to deal with, and the information's flowing in, and they can access all this stuff. They can do simulations, and I just wondered if you've had any experience of that personally, or if you've actually seen this in action with your operations room. So that's one question, and then the other one is that quite fundamental to my understanding of Stafford's work is his fascination with incipient instability, and the design of algedonics and alerting signals that can look at all these all the variables which you seem to have done a brilliant job of refining and making relevant, and whether you actually look at algedonics and attempt to identify incipient instability.
So to your question, in terms of experience with having this in practice, Martin mentioned it at the beginning. We have a prospect in that for this, but we haven't actually implemented this in practice with a client yet. So I'm sure iteration 3, 4, 5, 6 will be very, very different and much more detailed. The second question, I mentioned it briefly, but or perhaps not so briefly, but I mentioned obviously the alerting system that we would be using is for a situational change, right? So if it's just a noisy trend that we're looking at over month by month or day by day, we don't need to flag this. One, because there's no step change going on. And second, because the range of fluctuation can be defined, and therefore, as long as you're not breaching this, you're okay. And obviously we can refine the fluctuation range to the client based on what they perceive as well. But based on the PIMS benchmarking, that would be enough, I think. But obviously, I think there is room for more specific or more, let's call it smarter ways of doing those alerts. So I'm sure we can come up with more ways to do what you say, John. I don't know if you had anything in mind in particular.
Don't forget.
Well, I mean, the thought that was going through my head was the experiences in Chile when the CIA brought all the transport companies to a halt, and how all the algedonics were flowing into the very rudimentary operations room, which they'd almost completed by then, and just this whole thing of being able to identify where you need to focus your attention, and the monitoring of vast numbers of variables, which you can ignore most of them as long as they're within the acceptable ranges, but then have the system that can predict and identify the areas where you really need to focus on. So it was that kind of thing. It was, I remember in Stafford's chapter on this, he talks about a sudden decline in the sales of chocolate cake.
I think I understand, John.
Yeah.
I think I understand, John. Martin, isn't that shall be covered by Sebastian's work as well? He has dedicated his PhDs, I remember, exactly on the topic raised by John about understanding the filters, the levels, the fluctuation, the boundaries, the limits of all the data and the noise that's being created to differentiate between information and what's really statistical noise. And I think Sebastian has dedicated quite a portion of research on this.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you're also raising the question of sociological aspects, interacting people in such a room, physiological aspects, psychological aspects, how information is digested, and so on. And the basic idea that it's not the managers who have to find information in lots of data, as opposed to the computers telling you where your attention is required. That concept, I think, is captured here. But how it's done, I think this is still under development. Yes, I think that's
Agreed.
something
Fully
that we
agreed.
have to try out also in pilot projects then.
Right, Martin?
Yes, Steve.
Yeah. Hi, Louis. Thanks for that. I used to do something very similar for BT many years ago when we were the main telecoms company in the UK. So I used to travel all over the world and used to benchmark the performance of BT delivering the last mile of connectivity in relation to what the upper quartile was amongst the other operators. And that way we could go to the regulator to be able to make changes to the actual pricing conditions. So I see that very well, but I just wanted to make a distinction between maybe the infinite game and the finite game. Finite games are finite, and the whole purpose of the infinite game is to keep on playing the game, Louis. But when I seen the new Lucia Lucy from Ferrari, the new Ferrari electric car, right? I didn't see anything about Ferrari in the car, and I was just wondering what that could do for the infinite game, where maybe the brand of Ferrari was being diluted by something that just did not look like Ferraris. Do you try and look at those two aspects of the modeling work that you're doing?
So I don't know if that would be shown in our system, but the public perception would be captured in the customer value side of things.
Yeah.
Because your image is going to take a hit. Your product is going to, you can do a separate analysis of that specific car, but clearly it's not being really well received. But that's going to be the first thing that falls is your customer value, which is a key factor in terms of business success. You're going to be falling behind your competitors. So that would show in the system. Perhaps not immediately, but because you would have to feed that information. But yes.
Yeah, because I've been looking at the finite game is really a leading indicator for the infinite game. You know, if a product comes out and all of a sudden it doesn't look right and it starts to vanish very quickly, you know, that is a good indicator that maybe the brand of the company is being diluted and people are now being turned away from sort of Ferrari. I was just a thought, you know, because I've got a business called The Infinite Game Has Happened. So a lot of the focus is really getting the organizational structure in place, so we can actually sort of, you know, understand the environment that we're working within. I just wanted to take you back to one of your slides there, and I think you picked this up. And I can see because of the type of work that you're doing, you're using S5, S4, and S3 as the sort of triple index. I would drop everything down one. But the reason I would do that, Lou, is I'm managing businesses operationally. You're effectively looking at it after the fact to a certain extent. With you doing benchmarking, everything is being done. You're not running it on a day-by-day basis. Because for me to be able to do that, I've got to have a reference model. I've got to have a referent to be able to compare the performance against. So the referent is S3, and the actual performance comes down to S1. And I have to engineer surprise. So I'm engineering surprise, which again is a leading indicator before the algorithmic failures. So I'm trying to identify weaknesses really within the operation, you know, or weaknesses within the model, because remember the resource bargain is generated through a model, at least it generally is. And I spend my lifetime building these models. I needed to do that for BT when we're decommissioning the UK network. It had to be very refined, the modeling type of work. So I've continued to do that. But I'm always really interested in how people engineer surprise so we can actually, stay on target, we can stay on course and make the necessary adjustments. What levers do we have to pull? What role is in control of various levers, so they can get the business or their business model back online. And like you say, it's the business models that I look at. So we'll have a lot of business models, say within BT. It's not BT I'm looking at, it's too big, just everything is coming together there. I want to be able to look at the individual product delivery units and how well they are comparing in relation to their competitors.
Understood.
This meant BT being British Telecom for those not.
Oh yeah, that's right, Martin. Yeah.
Thank you.
Martin, Emil's been waiting. He's had his hand up for a while. He's been
okay. Yes, please. And there is a question also by Ruth Knox afterwards. But please first, who is that?
Yeah.
Emil.
So
Emil.
Emil from the Netherlands. I was wondering. So this database has a lots of empirical data for the last few decades on many companies. Does it matter what type of company we're talking about? So, for example, is the database, I suppose it is useful for companies with stockholders, but is it also, for example, useful in a situation of a workers' co-op?
So
Does it make any difference?
To explain a little bit, to an extent, yes, but also no. So I'll make it a complex answer to help you. The way we look at businesses in the PIMS database is we ignore what they actually make or what they actually do. So you might be a soap manufacturer or you might make X-ray machines. That's irrelevant to us. We'll ask you if you make consumer durables or consumer non-durables, etc. But in the PIMS database, you are a business that has X% of manufacturing, that has a market share of Y, that has a customer that buys every year or every 2 years, etc. So the product at the end is irrelevant. What we care about is your financials, your competitive position, your market environment, so your customers, your market growth, your price growth, things like that. So yeah, if I've understood your question correctly, what the business actually does isn't so relevant in how we store it in the database. However, it will be captured in some of these metrics that we track. So they will be identified. And if you have another business that's similar in the future, we'll be able to match those businesses together on those metrics.
Maybe let me try, Louis, just to amend with a very short answer, Emil. PIMS being profit impact of market strategy applies to any business in a truly competitive environment. This is the only precondition that we have for the PIMS database. What we don't cover are businesses which are not based on true competition, such as minery, such as real estate, and I must admit, banks, we are not the strongest either, because banks have a very special profitability metrics, which is a so-called cost-income ratio. They don't work with the normal EBITDA, EBIT that we know from the other profit-oriented organizations. So PIMS applies everywhere where we have a true competition. This only excludes real estate, minery, and some other extraordinary business where are either a monopoly or a regulatory setup market, etc.
Does that help? I may comment that with a metaphor. I think we could explain it like that. A dolphin and a shark are in different businesses, but they have the same structure that makes them good swimmers. And what you're interested in here is a structure, not the industry. And the structure is comparable across a lot of industry, maybe not all, as you mentioned.
Sure.
So,
thank you all three for your answers.
It's quite sorry?
Thank you all three for your answers. Thank you.
Okay. Ruth, please. Ruth is saying that her microphone and speakers are not Zoom compatible, but she's posing the question, is this approach suitable for the UK public sector? And what sort of IT system does it plug into? I'm interested in the data that is needed. Across the public sector, we tend to be data rich, yet information poor. We are also constrained by the digital systems we can use, including AI.
Let me give it a try. Very good question. Definitely from a principal point of view, as Louis highlighted at the very beginning, all we have shown today is agnostic to the particular, not only industry, but I would even go so far as say agnostic to the particular subject matter. So from a principal point of view, deploying Stafford's performance indices, the viable system model, and the benchmarks that can be applied to anything. Are we strong when it comes to the public sector? I'm afraid, very honest, PIMSI Malik basically and naturally comes from the for-profit organization based on the PIMS database. It can be done, but I would say we lack now decades of experience, which we have in the for-profit sector.
Okay, I mean, there are different aspects of the operations room concept that we have here, one of which information alarm based in that case on the PIMS database. But of course, an operations room can also run without that kind of data and still have an information and alarm system that is geared to the specific application and industries and the structure of the operations room, how you're using AI, how you're using a model of totality of the environment, of a model of yourself for premises controlling, for measure controlling, for impact controlling, and so on. I guess that would stay the same. Now, Ruth, I see you can't answer here, but maybe if you want to write something into the chat, if you're satisfied with the answers, or would you like to state something else? If not, then thank you, Ruth Writing. I think it is an interesting idea to think how we could take the concepts and apply them to the public sector. I have applied the VSM to local government, and this would enrich it. Absolutely, absolutely. Let's discuss, is Pedram saying. So anybody else? I can't see if you're raising your hand, so please just speak up.
Hey, this is Nick Vodonik from the United States. Louis, thanks for the presentation. I can see the direct application of this kind of concept and this practice to the business unit and kind of helping to have a more dynamic and grounded evidence-based, steering function. I'm interested in your thoughts on coming at it from the lens of a shared corporate function that services multiple business units, and how this can enrich the discussions around a central supply chain that covers 80 business units, trying to pull together its triple lens of kind of how is that supply chain serving those customers, those internal customers, what's the capability to serve them today, and what's the potential. That's a discussion we're struggling with, and you have to do it right at the business unit first, but aggregating that up to have a focused, it's kind of shifting your system and focus a little bit. I wonder if you have any thoughts on taking that on as a problem using these tools.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because if you're looking at an organization at the sort of overlying organization, that central system will likely be split across the SBUs in terms of an allocation. What I would find really interesting is looking at that central, whatever it is, can it be considered a business unit? Because that might be interesting in saying that the customers are the internal other businesses, and therefore you might be able to map a lot of these metrics in terms of customer value. Obviously, competitors is going to be a different question, but a lot of these, I'm not entirely sure is my answer. It's a very interesting question.
Yeah, that was kind of where my head was going, is that the concepts, maybe you can sort of take them and apply it and sort of start to build your own view of performance. And then can you do the sort of aggregation of kind of how are the different 80 business units performing and what's your contribution to each of those CPCs from whatever function you're. And so I think those maybe are two angles of attack on the idea, but there's a lot of promise there, I think. Yeah.
I would probably say this format, this specific mapping doesn't really work in that case if you're trying to assess the central function. But you could take the concept and look at what actually matters for that central function. Are they fulfilling the demand, the requests that are needed from them? How fast are they doing it? And so the metrics and the variables, the essential variables will change. The concept
Exactly.
will still apply.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Louis. Exactly. And I would even be tempted to say one must be careful of whether in that point in time where we change from a strategic lens that is cross-sectional over spanning different industry, when we look into the benchmarking from a particular functional perspectives, I'm not even sure we are better off limiting the data set and then changing into a inner industry perspective to then look for best in class. Because the strategic approach that PIMS follows with the cross-sectional paradigm is good when it comes about strategic moves. Don't forget that the abbreviation of PIMS standing for the profit impact of a market strategy chosen. Now, as far as a centralization of a procurement or a shared service department in an organization has a direct effect on the bottom line of a business unit, is not necessarily what PIMS was made for. But I completely agree with Louis that the principles can definitely be applied and the particular variables might change and be closer to typical KPIs from within industry benchmarkings.
So you would have different KPIs specific to your value chain, but
exactly,
you still would
Martin.
have the concept of actuality, potentiality, capability, real-time information and alarm and so on, simulation possibilities, and all the rest of the operations room, right?
Yeah, and those would be, capability, potentiality would be self-referential in this case, or from whatever other database you can find relating to that specific use case.
This is really helpful. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Nick. Anybody else? If not, anybody holding their hands up? I don't see that. I don't think so. If not, then thank you very much, Louise. I would like to close the webinar just with one little remark, an outlook on what is coming up next. I have shown you that at the beginning also. If you have anything specific that you're interested to hear, specific discussions that we should have, then let me know in the chat. If not, the plan for the next webinars is on September 9th. It's actually every second Wednesday each month, except for holiday seasons. 9th of September, UD Tennemann. Hope to see you there. This is an application case on the viable system model in the German industry. October 14th, Andreas Schmidt, Financial Services application case of the VSM. So we go back, focus on VSM questions. And on November 11th, Mark Lamberts on developments regarding VSM gaming and VSM software, AI-driven software also for VSM diagnosis and design. Quite happy with these new guests. Again, let me know if you would like to hear somebody specific. I try to invite these guests, and if not, I'm very happy to see you again. The recording of this webinar will, sorry?
Just a short point of feedback before you're closing off.
Yes, thanks.
Could the events in October and November also be shared on the website? Because I was currently just sharing it by copy-pasting the email that was sent to me.
Yes.
That's not the most efficient route to do.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we have quite some things to improve in our mission here. Absolutely, we will do that. We are currently trying to professionalize things a little bit, and that's one of the parts. It's on our agenda. And the recordings will be available also on the Metaforum YouTube page. And I will also have a link in LinkedIn to the webinar here for anybody interested. If you have somebody you think you should have a look at it, please repost. Thank you very much, Luis, for your presentation.
Thank you.
It was excellent to have you as a guest. Thanks everybody for participating. Once more, excuse please for the technical problems and the delay. And I wish everybody nice evening. We have evening now here in Switzerland, at least a nice evening or a happy day. See you again. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Yes, Martin, and thanks, Lewis.
All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Ciao.